but the flowering stems will go away. And that way you don't have to feel so bad about cutting them.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to bring up Jennifer Duncan, who is going to introduce our speaker tonight. She's our new board member, one of the two. The other one who had Ava.
Thanks, Grace. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. This is the annual Louisa Beck Memorial Lecture, which has been going on since 2006. I was particularly delighted this year, our invited guest, Dr. Lynne Trulio, who has been at San Jose State University since 1991. One of her first students who worked at NASA Ames Research Center, which is where I worked and where Louisa Beck worked. We were all buddies back then. So it's a really nice connection. Janice was studying burrowing owls, and with Dr. Trulio, Dr. Trulio has done an amazing long period of work about burrowing owls, as well as many other things. She's been the lead scientist for the South Bay Restoration Project for a number of years, and she has been the chairman of the Environmental Sciences Department at San Jose State University for 15 years. And more recently, she's been the associate dean of the College of Social Sciences that Environmental Sciences has been. So we're really very happy to have her here tonight to talk to us about California biodiversity and how we can help protect it.
Nice introduction. Great to see all of you here today, and inviting me to talk about California biodiversity. As Jen mentioned, one of the main species I study is the burrowing owl. I also study birds. I study California ground squirrels in my Ph.D. So I know a lot about California vertebrates and birds, but you can't study animals without learning about plants and the habitats that they live in. And so that's why, while I'm not specifically a plant person, I do know quite a bit about California native plants and biodiversity and in writ large, okay? So I am going to talk with you about California's amazing biodiversity, why we are so special in California with respect to the species that live here. We can talk about plants and unique plants and why they're here and what we can do to protect them. So please. All right, so the first thing I want to say, and we talk about this a bit, is that California is a biodiversity hotspot. That is an actual thing. And Conservation International has been working for years to identify biodiversity hotspots around the world. California is, in fact, a treasure trove of plant, animal, and invertebrate biodiversity. So biodiversity being the diversity, the number of species that we have, but also the genetic diversity within those species. That's what biodiversity is, sort of the big definition. What makes a biodiversity hotspot? Well, here you can see a map that shows the biodiversity hotspots around the world. Biodiversity, I just mentioned, species diversity and the genetic diversity within those species, and hotspot qualities, places where there are a lot of species in a small area. So what qualifies an area as a hotspot? There have to be at least 1,500 endemic species in the area, and the hotspot is a place where at least 70% of the primary vegetation has been lost or altered by human activity. There are about 36 such areas worldwide, and you can see them here in red. Certainly we know about the Amazon basin, and maybe, sort of Indonesia area, but you can also see California. There we are, a hotspot. So I mentioned that there were 1,500, you have to have at least 1,500 endemic species. So what is an endemic species? Anybody have an idea what an endemic? Yes. It's only found there. That's right. An endemic species is a species that's only found in that particular place. So yeah, that's right. And we definitely qualify as a hotspot in California. There are over 2,000 endemic species that are found only here in California. And that's just plant species. That's approximately 40% of the plant species that we've identified in California. We have endemic plants. We'll talk about a number of them. Yes. A few birds, not too many endemic birds though. And, maybe it's obvious, but it's because they fly. And so they can, move around very easily. A few mammals, but a lot of insect species. A lot of plants, a lot of insects. And I think that you can see that co-evolutionary connection there between plants and insects work together. Okay, factors in the biodiversity, the great biodiversity in California. Why are we so biodiverse? We're going to talk about that in a minute, but some of the factors that produce this biodiversity are our Mediterranean climate. Now, I read some articles recently that dispute that a little bit. Not really the Mediterranean climate, but I disagree. I think the Mediterranean climate does have something to do with it. But certainly the diverse topographical, geographical, and meteorological conditions in California. We've all experienced that, right? You live here on the peninsula. You just go over here. This is a totally different environment, right? So California is like that all over the place. What I'm showing in this map here is what's called the California Floristic Province. The California Floristic Province is the zone that actually is mediated by the Mediterranean climate. Okay, and that's where a lot of the species are. But you can see other parts of California up in the Northeast and certainly the Sonoran Desert area. Those are other floristic provinces. They're just not Mediterranean. So all of those factor together in California's biodiversity. All right. So this is a little hard to read, but it's a map that shows the 5 principal biomes in California. And a biome is really described as a zone of integrated species that you find throughout that biome. And so, for instance, the grassland biome, the desert biome, conifers, chaparral, and woodland. And each of these biomes has dominant species that define them, as well as dominant climatic and soil conditions. And you can see those are 5 primary biomes in California. Here's some nice pictures of them. Conifer forests, redwood forests, which we're so fortunate to have on the peninsula here, so many beautiful redwoods. Oak woodlands, one of the most dominant biomes in California. The number of approximately 18 species of oak found only here in California. So oak woodlands are a very important biome. Grasslands, and this is sort of a high elevation grassland on the left. I'm especially familiar with grasslands. That's where burrowing owls tend to hang out. this bird that I said. Has anybody seen burrowing owl? Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Okay, great. Yes, and by the way, they live with California ground squirrels, so don't curse those California ground squirrels. Burrowing owls need them. Chaparral, we have a lot of chaparral, certainly on in our region, up through the Sierra, and of course the deserts. Oh, and then wetlands, one of my favorites. As Jen mentioned, I was the lead scientist for the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project for the 5 years of its planning, and then in between phase 2 and 3, phase 1 and 2, sorry. And our goal is to restore tidal salt marsh wetlands around the South San Francisco Bay. And so in the middle is a historic tidal salt marsh. That's what we're trying to achieve. But there are lots of other amazing wetlands in California, including vernal pools on the left, which I don't know if anybody's seen them. They're quite rare. We used to have quite a few of them in the Bay Area, especially over in the East Bay, but they've all pretty much been lost to development. Riparian wetlands, such as the riverine shot here. California, unfortunately, is one of the most disturbed states in the nation. We have destroyed over 90% of the wetlands that were here historically. So we have to do a lot of work to restore wetlands, and there is a lot of opportunity actually to do that. All right, so a few of our Bay Area endemics, species you will find only here. So here's a Dudleya on the left. You've probably seen them if you've been over to the coast and walked along down like a craggy cliff. There are lots of Dudleya, different species. This one's endangered. It's found in serpentine grasslands. And that's one of the amazing things about California. I mentioned that biodiversity is promoted by a range of geological conditions. Serpentine, you might know, is California's state rock. It also has a pretty high asbestos content. Hey, that's just the way it is. And it makes it an inhospitable environment for most plants. But a number of plants have evolved to live in serpentine habitats. And so you see many serpentine endemics because it's such a weird place to live. If you live there, you probably evolved, to live in that spot. The Lemnospora here is a vernal pool species, and there are many endemic vernal pool species. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about islands, okay, and island biogeography, because I just can't help but throw a little ecological theory in. We'll talk about that in a minute, but think about vernal pools. If you've ever seen them, they're islands. They're islands of water in an area surrounded by inhospitable grassland. So they're totally different from the grassland next to them. And that's why you get a lot of these rare species in vernal pools. Here's another, the San Mateo woolly sunflower is another endemic, and you can see it's also another serpentine endemic. And here are some more. The San Benito poppy. Yeah, you've seen poppies around this, you've probably been around the state, different places, see poppies, different colors, different, maybe a little smaller, bigger. Poppies they're pretty genetically flexible. And so here we have one that's evolved in this region that is found in both woodlands, grasslands, very, very localized though, very localized, San Benito County. A checker bloom in chaparral, and here's another, this meadow foam is also another vernal pool endemic. So why are there so many endemics in California? Remember we mentioned that in order to be a biodiversity hotspot, you need to have a lot of endemics. And we really do. So why do we have so many endemics? So yes, time for some ecological theory, starting at the beginning with Darwin and his finches. Everybody knows about Darwin, finches. And, you know, you went to the Galapagos, well, you've been to Ecuador first, seen the birds there. Then you went to the Galapagos and you saw the birds there. And you said, you know, these look like the birds from Ecuador, but not quite, you know? And he started noticing all the variations in these birds. The Galapagos is a relatively isolated island chain. And so he started seeing finches, but they were different and they were kind of fitting into the niches, the environments on the Galapagos, doing things that the finches, you know, in Ecuador weren't doing. And he started to really start the wheels turning. By the way, you know that there's a guy named Wallace too who also came up with this thing. Yeah. So, all right. So he went to an island, and so did Wallace, by the way, and saw the difference in the species. And so much later, other ecologists went to islands, in particular, Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson. E.O. Wilson, who died recently, the world's most well-known ecologist, I would say, and spent his life studying and trying to protect biodiversity around the world. He actually is a beetle guy, lots of beetles. And so E.O. Wilson and his professor, Robert MacArthur, were looking at islands, and they went and looked at islands around the world. And one thing they found about islands is that, you know, you have a mainland, right? Like we have a mainland here, it could be like Ecuador, and then out here we have the Galapagos, or we have a mainland like California, and then way out here you have Hawaii, okay? Hawaii is a huge source of huge place of endemic species. It's the most isolated island chain in the world. And what happens is, when you have islands off of the mainland, you have species from the mainland, right here. Oops, sorry about that. Species from the mainland, and they get out to the islands. They might fly out there, might float out there. You know, they get out there, might get carried out there. You know, somehow they get out there. The closer they are to the closer the islands are to the mainland, the more species you're going to have on them. Kind of makes sense, right? But one thing you find is also the bigger the island, the more species you're going to have. There are a lot of reasons for that. There are more niches, maybe just more space. So you think if you have mountain lions, right? Animal that needs a lot of space. Not going to find one on a small island. Need a big island. Okay, so the smaller the large, bigger is better. And the further away you get from the mainland, the fewer species you have. It's just harder to get out here. Okay, and of course, the smaller ones that are furthest away, they're the ones with the fewest species. It's hard to get there, not that many niches. Plus, species get there, and they might hang on for a while, but the smaller the island, the more likely you are to have extinctions. The smaller the island, the more likely you are to have extinctions. And so, this is the theory of island biogeography. This theory is so influential that it appears in ecological literature all over the place and actually has been used in designing reserves. It's used in all kinds of things. So I'm going to show you how it's used here in California. Before we get to that, what are islands? Islands are a lot of things. We talked about islands, like Hawaii, the Galapagos, all right? But look at these alpine zones. See those alpine zones? They are habitat surrounded by inhospitable conditions. So the inhospitable conditions for the alpine zones is everything below it, right? So they are the islands, right? Ponds, they're islands. They're water islands, right? Surrounded by inhospitable habitat. Just like I mentioned, the vernal pools. Vernal pools, they're little watery habitats surrounded by grassland, the inhospitable habitat. Isolated forests. Okay, so they can occur on large and small scales, and they are a key theory in conservation biology and ecology. And see if I kept that next slide. Next slide. No, I didn't keep it. I thought I already. One thing I want to say about island biogeography is that this theory about islands, if you are designing reserves for a species, you want it to be as big as possible, right? Because bigger islands have more species. You want your reserve to be as close as possible to the mainland. The mainland being the source of species for your islands. So if we live in a world in which we are fragmenting the natural environment, we're cutting it up into little bits. And it's, you fly over anywhere, you see a forest here, and then we have urbanization and road and forest, you know, those forests are all patches. We are fragmenting habitats and creating islands throughout the world with the world's habitats. What we need to do is make those islands bigger, connect them up. Otherwise, we will lose species. You can say we have habitat, yeah, we have forests, we have wetlands, but if they're all chopped up, you cannot maintain species diversity. And so that's the world that we're facing. So that's why island biogeography is so important, because we are creating islands out of everything, the natural environment. Okay, but why do we have so many endemic species in California? We're not an island, are we? So it turns out that California is kind of an island. We are separated from the mainland by the Sierra. And the Sierra are a huge barrier for a lot of species. Okay, so we are something of an island. So you want to think about, well, you know, so we are an island, and some species get here. Are species, you know, speciating? And are we getting new species forming, right? So that would be one way your island would get endemics. Another way, though, that an island can get endemics is not very obvious from this map. So we do have species, we do have speciation that's occurring among a number of genera, especially like lupins, salvia, sages, so many different ones, right? They have speciated, so new species have formed here in California, but one of the main reasons we have so many endemics is that California is an island. It is a relic island. So in the Arctic Tertiary, there are various periods going millions of years back. Species such as giant sequoia and redwoods were distributed much more widely across the US. They were very dominant in a lot of places. However, as climate changed, not due to us this time, it just, climate does change. As it changed, those species were lost from the rest of the US, but they were able to be maintained here in California. So one thing we find is that many species that are here are relics of an earlier time that we have preserved here in California, which is pretty amazing. I thought that was amazing, because I always thought about everything speciating, you know, just always think about evolution, but you know, it's also that we have protected this California's, the diversity of habitats here have protected a wide range of species that simply don't exist anywhere else now. And so that's pretty amazing. So I mentioned species that some have been diversified, but we have a lot of species that we are protecting. The next slide. And so California is a center of biodiversity due to ancient and relic species, as well as new species, through speciation. And we are an exporter of species to other regions. So genetic, by the way, genetics, genomics, being able to map an entire genome has changed biology and ecology and wildlife behavior. I mean, everything. So we can now tell where species came from, how long ago they got there, things like that. So it turns out that California is a species refuge and a source of biodiversity to other regions. So for instance, we know that some species have been exported to Hawaii and the Andes. Yes, thank you. Okay, one of the great things about doing talks like this is you have to do some literature research to find out what the newest stuff is. And I just wanted to cite this paper. It was so great, and they used molecular phylogeny. They used looking at the molecular basis of different species to see when they evolved and where they came from. Amazing. Okay, next slide. Okay, California biodiversity hotspot. The other criterion for a hotspot. So remember, endemic species. The other criteria was 70. Great. Next slide, please. Yes. Yes, at least 70% of the original habitat is lost. Sadly, we qualify for that. California is losing species as a result because we have destroyed so much habitat. So I mentioned that we, destroyed at least 90% of the wetlands that were here historically. Somewhere around 95% of the riparian habitat next to streams. Agriculture is a huge factor in that, but so is urbanization. There are more than 300 species endangered in California, and the reasons are diverse. I mentioned agriculture, certainly transforming the landscape to grow crops. But one of the other big factors, cows. Cows eating meat, a huge factor in species diversity, loss of species diversity. A lot of the stuff grown is to feed cows. And cows use a tremendous amount of water, produce a huge amount of methane. So they're really problematic. Of course, there's also development, urban development, and in particular sprawl. California is the queen of sprawl. I mean, we're seeing stuff like that all over the sorry. Yes, and then also I draw your attention to the landfill down here. We're also in California, the US, huge consumer culture. And a lot of it ends up there in the landfill. So all of that stuff came from the earth, made with resources that used to be covered by habitats. So that's sort of, our story. And you say, okay, but we do have these places like Joshua Tree, that we're protecting. We do have protected a lot of area in California, by the way. California has done a very good job protecting a lot of area.
That wasn't in your island, right?
This wasn't in my island.
No.
Oh, it's not in the California floristic province, but there are other provinces that are included, these desert provinces like the Sonora Desert, which contribute to the full biodiversity of the state. But even in places that appear pristine, we are losing species. So a study done recently found that at 61 sites studied in the Mojave Desert, they had been mapped many years before, and then researchers went back and looked at them again, found 43% fewer species in these areas and declines in a wide range of species. And these researchers really said the cause is drying and warming due to climate change. So we have transformed the habitat and the surface of the land, the surface of the earth with our activities, and now we are transforming the atmosphere with our activities. Climate change, that's going to be about climate change from now on, no matter what anybody think. It's here, it's not theoretical, it's affecting us now, we know that. Fire in California. So climate change. So the thing is that at this time in the Earth's history, we are experiencing a global mass extinction event of species. It's the 6th one that we have cataloged. And this means that a high percentage of species are going extinct. So the current rates of extinction are thousands of times higher than the natural extinction rate. Extinction is natural, extinction happens, right? But compared to pre-human times, before the Anthropocene, there was an extinction rate, and now during the Anthropocene, the extinction rate is very, very much higher. And we know a lot of species that are vulnerable to extinction. I mentioned there have been other such events where 70 to 95% of species living on the earth have disappeared, caused by natural forces such as volcanic eruptions, loss of ocean oxygen, or yes, a meteorite, which we're all aware of, did the dinosaurs in. But this crisis is caused by us. This time we're the meteor. And the thing is that, the meteor doesn't really have a choice of what it's doing. We do though. We can do something about what's going on. And at this point in our history, actually in the Earth's history, there are actually more species at this present time than have existed at any particular time. So we are in an age of incredible biodiversity, but we are losing that. Okay. So the species extinction, what's the problem? I probably don't have to explain this to you, but there are people that do need to have this explained. Why do we care? Who cares if there's a butterfly here or there, some plants over here? Who cares? Okay, so Paul Ehrlich, I like his river copper analogy. You might have heard this, but okay, you're sitting in an airplane, getting ready to take off, and you look out the window, and there's some guy on the wing popping rivets out of the plane. Right, boing, boing. So you call over the attendant and say, we're not going to take off, are we? This guy is taking the plane apart. He's popping these rivets out of the plane. And the attendant goes, yeah, see that. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of rivets on this plane. We don't really need all those rivets. It's okay. And you go, all right. And that may be true. There may be some redundancy in the system, you take off, maybe the plane won't crash. But there will be a point when you've popped enough rivets, the plane's going to crash. And the fact is that our economies, our world that we live in, and humans depend on the other species on this planet. We actually can't live without them. And so other reasons to care, ethical reasons, aesthetics, My favorite, the ethical reason, all of the species deserve to be here too, including us, right? But they're also responsible for climate stability too, which is something that is pretty essential for our survival. All right. Well, one of the big problems that we're facing is that, have you heard about your ecological footprint? Okay, if you haven't, the ecological footprint is, you can look it up. There's a group, the Ecological Footprint Group, and what they do is they calculate how big your impact is on the planet based on the amount of resources that you use, depending on where you live, what kind of house you live in, what kind of car you drive, stuff like that. They tell you how much of the planet you're using. And so over here on the left is a measure of the actual use of the planet by the whole human race. That green line is what's called biocapacity. That's the amount of biological resources produced by the earth. We have exceeded that. We exceeded that way back there in like 71. What that means is that we're eating into the Earth's capital, okay? And that's where the biodiversity loss comes from. It's kind of like the difference between harvesting fish at the rate that they reproduce versus harvesting fish too fast so that faster they reproduce. Eventually you're gonna run out of fish, right? So kind of where we are, and then this thing on the right kind of shows the global footprint of different nations. Now look at us, that big blob over there on the left, that's us. If everybody lived the way we do, we'd need more than 6 planets to support us. Okay, look at India. You go, well, what about India? They have a lot of people over there. Well, yeah, but India and Africa, they're pretty, India's pretty big because of the number of people. But each person in India uses at least 1/6 of what we do here. So they have, they use a lot less. Not more people, but use a lot less. And China's really gotten out of hand. Because they have a lot of people and they're using a lot of stuff. So that's kind of this global consumption footprint thing. So that isn't good, right? This is why we're losing species. This is why habitats are being lost. Okay, so the biggest threat, and I mentioned it before, is habitat loss and habitat fragmentation due to our activities. Other big causes, yes, hunting, poaching, and overfishing, especially ocean fish. Exterminating, large predators, which we never seem to be able to get along with, honestly. And then here's another one, non-native invasive species. Non-native invasive species. Now, these are responsible for contributing to the imperilment of something like 40% of species. And lots of non-native invasive species that are affecting, native species. So for instance, here we have feral pigs, which I would, I'd be out banding burrowing owls at the night, high up in the hills, and a bunch of pigs run by. And so they're incredibly destructive. European grasses, you might know all the grasses on the hills around here, non-native grasses. And unfortunately, our cats. Cats are they might be one of the world's most destructive non-native invasive species. So I have 2 myself, and they are not allowed to roam and kill stuff. And they're happy. And the other monster threat, of course, is global climate change. which will be affecting everything, including us. All right. Climate change scenarios. Let's get that. That's boring. Okay. Fire. Yeah. we know about this. This came from a paper in 2008. Okay. This is, California is going to burn, including urban areas. We've known this for a very long time. And so it's not news, and it's probably maybe even happening faster than Lynne et al. Had predicted back in 2008. Okay, so what do we need to do? There are a lot of things that we need to do, a lot of things we can do. As I tell my students, these issues can be downright depressing. It's like, yikes. But we created these issues, and so we actually can solve them. In fact, we know how to solve them. We do know how to solve these issues. We just need to do it, right? So, okay. Well, one of the most important things that can be done is to empower and educate women worldwide. When women are educated, they completely change society and the way population grows and the standard of living, lifespan, quality of life. So one of the number one things we can do is empower women worldwide. Okay. Reduce consumption. Reduce consumption. We waste 40% of everything we use. 40% of water, 40% of our food, you name it. So energy use, we waste energy. So there's a lot of things we can do. And, we have a lot, we're running out of water. Water is the real issue. It is really an issue, but we actually waste so much of it. It's dire, but it's not as dire as it has to be, because we can actually do a lot to reduce the amount of water per person. The water daily use per person, the furthest one over on the left, this right-hand graph, first over on the left is us, US. And then it, kind of goes down from there. If the entire US gave up meat for one day, it would save a tremendous amount of water. I heard it would save somewhere around the amount of water in the Colorado River. That's how much water is used by cows for meat. Okay. Next, protect seed banks. So contribute to and protect seed banks. There's the largest seed bank in California, which is protecting species that might be coming endangered or imperiled, saving their seeds so that in the future we can be sure to, when we restore habitat, which I hope will happen, we'll be able to replant them. And this California Botanical Garden in Southern California is the largest seed bank in California, preserving species from all around the state. So that's, I thought, very, very important thing to do. It's kind of like a zoo for plants, right? We have zoos around. So, next slide. Here's a boring slide, but protect and manage natural areas in perpetuity. California has a lot of places where we have set aside land for conservation. Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, East Bay Regional Park District. We have so many of these beautiful places that actually are protected. And Gavin Newsom has enacted a what do you call it, kind of a executive order to try to conserve 30% of California's 100 million acres by 2030. So that's a tall order, but to continue on this path, the Californians really do buy into, really care about preserving. And so that is great. I also, though, have worked with many open space authorities, and I want to highly recommend that open spaces commit to science-based management of conservation lands for biodiversity. It's very easy to say we're preserving land and then put trails all over it. And I've done a lot of research on the impacts of recreation on wildlife. I believe in recreation. We should get out there, enjoy nature, but there's a way to do it. And having trails all over everything makes islands out of everything, right? And so, so we need to have a careful balance with other uses and our enjoyment and appreciation of nature being, restore degraded habitat, of course, I could say this, but restoration, so we want to conserve, but we've lost a lot, right? So what we need to do then is restore areas that we have lost. The salt pond project, was just, it was expensive to get those salt ponds out of Cargill, but the Cargill, they hung on to those ponds for a while because they thought they were going to be able to develop them. But then it became very clear that they were never going to be able to develop them. And so they sold them to the federal government and the state government, which is great. These ponds are very easily turned back into tidal salt marsh, I would say relatively easily compared to other types of habitats. Took a lot of planning and work, but they want to be marshes. So, knock holes in those levees and let that tide in, and you get some, tidal marsh happening relatively quickly, which is really great. And this project is the second largest wetland restoration project in the US, next to the Everglades restoration, which is super great. So restoring. By the way, it's great. It costs money though. So we have to be willing as a society to support it. Eliminate non-native invasive species. So one of the issues that we did face with the salt pond project and its restoration, there was a non-native cordgrass. We wanted a native cordgrass, which is a grass that grows in the wetland. There's a non-native one out there that was taking over. So the invasive Spartina project people got out there and they have kicked its butt. They have really gotten rid of that invasive Spartina, which is great. One of the problems with the invasive Spartina, not only was it taking over habitat, it was interbreeding with the native species and thereby wiping it out, which is, by the way, what's happening with the spotted owl. So not only are we losing the spotted owl's habitat, but the barred owl, which is the eastern equivalent, the eastern species of, sort of like the eastern equivalent of the northern spotted owl, has expanded across the US, probably following us. The barred owl is a much more aggressive owl. It's an owl that does well with people. Moved into spotted owl habitat and is interbreeding with spotted owls. Boy, oh boy. Okay. Okay. So those are some sort of global things. What can I do? What can we do individually as a person? Lots of things. So reduce water use and reuse water. There are lots of ideas and programs that help people do that. So Valley Water, if you go to their water conservation programs, it can tell you all about that. Maybe a bunch of you are, maybe you are familiar with these. Okay, so that's something very important to do. I personally am a native plant Nazi, and so my husband's a landscape architect. He likes, he likes not just natives, but other plants, that look cool and so forth. But outside in our yard, it's all native, and he's definitely on board for that. So, and the natives don't use very much water. They don't use much water at all. They're adapted to the climate, as you know, in our dry summers. Reduce the consumption of stuff. Reuse, eliminate plastic. That's one of my current campaigns, trying to get rid of as much plastic as possible in my life. and eat less meat, or no meat, if possible. Okay. And reduce energy use. There's a bunch of things to do there. Other things, eliminate grass and plant native species. So another great way to get reduce water. Volunteer for a native plant restoration project. There are lots of them out there. Very fun. Sometimes spend a day, pulling up non-native invasive species. Great way to get your impressions out on stuff, Sometimes you plant natives. It's very, very fun. And then if you're involved at all with your city council or local governments, they need to hear from you about biodiversity and the protection of species in our cities, in our counties. I see a lot of cities, counties, all jumping onto the sustainability bandwagon, developing sustainability plans. But that's nice, it's great. But it tends to be focused on energy and water. They're like human infrastructure. I don't see biodiversity as part of the sustainability plan. And we need to have us getting out there, telling our city councils, county supervisors that they need to take action and include biodiversity as essential to sustainability plans. So, my little soapboxes there. Okay. Next slide. All right, we reached the end. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking with you today, and I would welcome any questions that you may have. Yes.
Well, if you could correct perhaps some information I had belonging to